Okay, let's start. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this entrepreneur experience tonight. My name is Karen, and we have Francis Hedder here with you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
And an entrepreneur, he's an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, and by the way, also the founder of the Hive. And we're a co-working space operator with 20 locations in 7 countries here in Asia. And tonight he will share his experience by being an entrepreneur. In the first session, I have some questions for him, and then in the second part, you guys can ask him some questions. Please, appropriate questions. So my team, they will give you some paper slips so you can write down your questions, and then we will answer them later. So let's get started. Constance, my first question for you would be, what gets you up in the morning?
Basically, the challenge. I love challenges. Entrepreneurial life is full of challenges every day. Problems too. You can think of problems as improvements that are just screaming out to be addressed, and that's the way that you've got to look at it. Obviously, when you're an entrepreneur, there's no possible way you can avoid solving problems, or there's no benefit to you of trying to go around something. You just got to get head in and get it done and solve it, and work with your team to make sure it's solved.
And tell us a little bit about your very first venture.
My very first venture was when I was 16, and I was at school, and I started a school magazine. Basically, it was like a private magazine that we did, and we sold it at our school, but also a bunch of other schools. And typical kind of journalistic venture. It was a bit of interviews, a bit of news, a bit of party promotion, and things like that. But that was the very first thing I did.
Okay, and in 1994, you started Frontier Media, an interactive voice response service with the newspaper clients like The Guardians, The Sun, The Sunday Times. But first of all, I would like to know, what's interactive voice response?
It's basically just a computer. It's the thing which, when you call a ticketing agency and you have to go through menus, it's one of those. So it's just a box that you can either do with your voice now, although they often don't work properly, or you can push buttons, and that's the bit of kit. And what we did was repurpose that bit of kit to play music. And it sounds kind of silly now, but in those days you had radio where you could listen to new tracks. There was no internet. And what we did is, for magazines and newspapers, we let people phone a line and listen to the latest tracks. So they would do an album review, and then you could call a number and listen to that album and go through the tracks. And our two markets were DJs. Obviously, DJs wanted to go through the latest different progressive charts, etc. Duncan probably think of this. And the second thing was pop. So one of our clients was Smash Hits magazine, sold 500,000 copies every 2 weeks, and obviously a lot of those kids were very, very keen to hear the latest Britney Spears track. And we, it was a premium rate line, so we made 40 pence a minute or whatever it was. It was quite a high number. But we at least allowed people to get through the track and skip forward 10 seconds and select the track. So it was kind of interactive, and it found an audience, and it took a while to crack that business. It was never something that was a massive business. It was a very, very specialized niche, basically. But we were the only company doing it. And we were the only company doing it for a very good reason, and that was that we didn't have permission. We tried to get permission from the record labels. At that time, they had, with Kazaa and other file sharing, they were completely paranoid. Not that that's changed that much, but they could see that their revenue streams and their IP was in danger. And as soon as we came to them and said, look, we want to do an interactive blah, 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 they kind of just freaked out, and they wouldn't give us permission. So they pushed it, we got pushed around for about 2 years, back to the agency. There's a collections agency called the PPL. They said, no, it's not us, you've got to go and talk to the labels and blah, blah, blah. So one or two of the lawyers, we had to go in and see the senior counsels at EMI Records, Warner Brother Records, and I was like a young entrepreneur, and they were like, who are you? Quite lucky to get in front of them. One or two were quite progressive, and they could see that it wasn't a threat to their IP, and that they were fine to give us permission. But collectively, we didn't get it from all of them. And in the end, we had a client called News International. You probably know them. It's Murdoch's company in the UK. They have The Sun. The Sun used to sell 3 or 4 million copies a day. And they said, yeah, just do it anyway. And if they're going to complain, they have to come and talk to us. So So having a client like that just meant that we just started it. It's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission, as I'm sure all of you mightn't realize. And we just set aside the 20%. It was about putting aside 20% for those rights holders, for the either the songwriters or the performers who were the rights holders on that music. It's about putting that money aside. And we said, yeah, fine, look, we'll just put the money aside. You come to us when you have a license and we'll pay you. And we had a couple of incidents where the PPL phoned us up and said, what the hell are you doing? We're going to sue you. And I said, no, you said basically I could go ahead. And this was an earlier conversation I'd had with this guy. And this guy was not a very good guy to do business with. And at some point during these negotiations, I'd started recording my conversations, which I'm not sure is legal, but we'd started doing just because there was a lot of flip-flopping and it was driving me a bit crazy. So I said, no, you did say that I could go ahead. You said I could go ahead and you will come up with a license. And he said, no, I didn't, and it was a bit of a pointless discussion. And in the end, I just said, look, I actually recorded that conversation. And then he kind of went, okay. And the problem went away. So it was quite painful. We eventually started to make a bit of money. It was just me, actually, I keep saying we, it's a habit, but it was just me in a garage in Fulham, which was owned by the council, cheap rent, me and a bunch of computers and a stack of records, and all these clients which I had to look after. I went a little bit stir crazy, but it was my start in business.
That's interesting. And what was your keenest memory about this whole time, the first step?
I think it's the anecdote around permission and what you should do. Should you wait? Should you go ahead? If you're doing a business which is dependent on another agency, let's say a lot of fintech companies are having the same problem. They're starting. They can see an opportunity. They can see a problem that can be solved, and then they're having a lot of pain getting permission from, let's say, the regulatory authorities. I think Singapore is probably one of the most progressive, and it's probably one of the best places to do a fintech startup. But Hong Kong, for instance, is quite painful, and other markets are quite painful. And you either have big bucks and you're prepared to just take the regulatory risk and go ahead anyway and solve that problem later. But also that can come back, and you need deep pockets to be able to do that. So I think a lot of other entrepreneurs suffer the same problems as I did.
Now, all of this also happened not long after the French billionaire Xavier Niel made an absolute killing using a similar technology. But instead of music, he founded his fortune on a premium rate of sex lines like sex chats. Now, be honest. Is there any part of you that wanted a bite of that pie?
I mean, no. There's a case in a few of the businesses I've done where you can see that there's a business opportunity relating to what you're doing. In this case, it uses exactly the same kit. It was literally the same computers. It's actually much easier to run it. You don't need any permission. You just get actresses to do porn lines, and then you run it and you put it in the back of magazines. It turns out that he's been turned into one of France's most successful entrepreneurs. But that was how he made his start. In England, it was actually full of a few gangsters as well. So we kind of knew who they were. There are some families that run some of these magazine empires, and they're quasi gangsters. So I think in the end I was like, actually, I'm not quite sure I'm ready to do that at this stage in my business career. But do I regret it? Maybe.
Well, in 1999, you took your first step onto the internet by founding GamesWire.com, which is an online retailer for games. So if you were to describe this experience in one word, what would that be?
Painful. It was very painful. I was used the profits from Frontier Media. It was started to generate a few profits, not much, a couple of 100,000 and 300,000 a year to start an internet business. What can you start with that amount of money? Online retail is a business you could start. Then there wasn't Shopify, but still it wasn't that difficult to create a shopping basket and get credit card transactions and all of that. It was still relatively inexpensive. And we thought, my logic was games are around £40, so we're going to be selling. It's maybe better than books. That was the extent of my business research. That told us that maybe games was an interesting one to sell physically and send it out. Now, the only trouble with that is low barriers to entry, which means that pretty well anyone could do it. And actually, even then, Amazon was coming in and loss leading basically. So it was very, very painful. You know, in other words, we just lost money. You know, everything we sold, we lost money, and we couldn't really see any way out of that.
So you were running those two companies, and then in 2001 you also co-founded the gaming company Jagex alongside brothers Andrew and Paul Gower. So tell me, how did that come along?
It came about because I did GamesWire.com. You know, GamesWire was a very difficult business. I was looking for things to add to it. So I was looking for online games to add to it. And I thought that, you know, that would attract users. Maybe some of those users we can convert into buying customers. And so I started to look for online games developers and found a couple of guys in Norway, for some reason, Scandinavia. There are a lot of people doing Java games in Scandinavia. And then I came across another site which looked, you know, very professional. He had a number of tiny games which he was licensing to websites like mine. And he was, you know, very responsive on the email. You know, we had a couple of small games we were going to put onto our site, 1,500 quid a year, this type of price. And then during one of my emails, I'm like, you know, so where are you based? You know, and he said, I'm in Cambridge. And I went, are you still at university? And he goes, yes, I'm still at university. So my immediate thing was, right, let's go for a pint. You know, so the best thing you would do in England is go down to the pub, have a pint of beer. So I jumped on the train, went down to Cambridge, and invited him out from his college, and we had a drink. And it was during this chat that he kind of sheepishly admitted to me that he had a bigger game that he'd been working on, which was an MMO. And he was very, very keen. You know, he got it to the point where he wanted to publish it himself, but he didn't really know how to go about it. So I kind of said, well, you know, let's go and see it. So we went back to his college, went back to his room, and he showed me a very, very early version of RuneScape, which was at that time, a playing window, which was about, probably can't see, but it was just a couple of inches across, maybe 3 inches across the playing window. And the world was 3D. Victoria's probably before you even started playing. But the world was 3D, but the characters were 2D. So when they walked across, they flipped. And it was kind of hilarious. But what you could see is that it loaded in your browser, and this was even on a 56K modem, which probably none of you will remember. It loaded in your browser in just a couple of minutes. You could immediately start playing. You just created an account in like 5 seconds, and you were into the game. And to me, even as a non-gamer, that accessibility seemed very, very revolutionary. And he had done all that basically on his own when he was an undergraduate, which meant a 3D games engine, a scripting language, graphics compression technology, streaming technology. All of this he had done on his own. So he, you know, was a serious genius. And it was about a year later that he left the college. He had a couple of goes at like trying to launch it himself. Then he came to me and said, look, I just need you to come and help me run the company. And that invitation meant that I probably went on the train again. We talked about it, and I became a sort of partner with him and his brother. And we invested about £15,000 to pay for the servers until we could launch the members version of the game. And that's what we did in 3 months. He had the free game running then, by the way, so I missed that part out. But he had 100,000 people playing the free game, and obviously was not making any money. So the servers was costing him, and he wanted to launch a members version, which him and his brother we said, right, let's do it. Let's take 3 months. Let's take no salaries, and let's build content, right? So what I did is sorted out the servers. I sorted out a new advertising deal to cover those costs. We built a billing platform. Andrew and Paul made all the content, and then we created a fence that people would have to pay if they wanted to get access to that game content. And that led us to launch the company, and it led us to launch the members version of the game in February 2002.
Yeah, so when it was launched, how soon did you realize that this paid off?
What Andrew and I said is that week, that we were due to launch it, we said, look, if we don't get any traction with the membership, then that's it. We'll just call it quits. It's not something. At that point, we didn't have an office. We had the limited company. The IP was sitting in the limited company, but this was a real gamble to see whether it was going to work. And we turned it on. I think it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and in the first hour, we had 1,000 people subscribe, which at $5 each, that's $5,000 of revenue, which was enough to pay for one of us, or two of us probably. And then in the first week, 5,000 people subscribed, and then it just went on from that. And immediately in that week, Andrew and I spoke to each other. We said, right, we've got a business. Let's go and let's start hiring people and let's get an office and let's do this.
So for you as a non-gamer, how is it to work in the video gaming industry?
It was geeky, as you might imagine. I mean, great fun. There was like 450 people by the time I left in the company. Mostly boys, mostly men. We did try very hard to bring in girl gamers and girl programmers to the team, and we had quite a lot of success going back to universities and really working with them to try and attract people. But at that time, we looked across the room, and Andrew and I, sometimes we just shook our heads and we were like, how did that happen? It was a single floor of 400 people working for us after only a few years, and we were sometimes taken aback by that.
And if you could do this all over again, would you do anything differently?
With Jagex, we had two things we could have done. One is mobile, obviously, which looks as though, we really missed something. But the truth was we looked at 3G technology, and Andrew was like, we can't run RuneScape, which is so dependent on latency. We can't have players who are on PC also playing against players who are on mobile. So you would have to have two separate universes, and you'd have to have two separate game engines and so on. And at that time, Andrew and I made the decision that we had a lot of challenges and headaches, a lot of things we wanted to do on the web-based version. Would it be distracting to do the mobile version? And at the time, we thought it would be too distracting, and we may as well go after the business opportunities we could see with the web-based version. But then a few years later, Clash of Clans comes along, and we are like, damn, that could have been us. So I think that's probably my biggest regret for Jagex. And the second slightly smaller one is that we had a fantastic platform to do educational software. We had a games engine, we had a 3D world, we had a billing relationship with 1 million parents, because obviously it was parents who were paying for the subscription, who trusted us as a brand, and we could have very easily created a sub-enterprise which did educational software and teaching maths, English, and so on, of using the whole of our technology platform. And I think that would have been actually hugely interesting. Especially if you look now, there's just been another raise for BU, I think it's called, a valuation of about 6 billion. So yeah, there was definitely an opportunity there.
And how does running a business alongside a co-founder compare to doing it all alone?
Well, it's challenging. I mean, especially when your partner's a genius. He was a difficult genius at Jagex. There's no doubt. He didn't have a lot of social airs and graces. He was bullying. I don't know if you've ever seen any early videos of Bill Gates, but it was very similar. He was ruthless if someone didn't get something right. So it was kind of difficult, and we often had a kind of cleanup team that would come round after he had meetings with people. We'd have someone who'd come in and just sort of make everyone feel a bit better about themselves, because he was really quite difficult. But it was also incredibly vigorous. In a meeting, we used to run the company by having a 2 or 3 hour meeting once a week, and I would just come in fully prepared with an agenda, and we would just rattle through all the things that we wanted to decide. Because basically Andrew was my boss. I was the CEO, but he was the biggest shareholder. So, we shared it that way. Our mini board meetings would be me and him. And those 2 or 3 hour meetings were incredibly intensive, and it was like this, that, and I had to have all of the kind of pros and cons of each argument established before we could decide on something. And if I didn't, he'd be just like, go away, come back again, and when you've got all the facts that we need to do to decide this. So it was very vigorous. I think I learned a lot. I think I grew a lot during it. I miss that sometimes, but there are pros and cons. We achieved our goals, and I think when you don't have a co-founder, you don't have that person to bounce ideas off, and it's a different challenge. You need other people around you.
And you voluntarily stepped away in 2007. And what factors led to this decision?
Basically, that number thing. I was about 38 by then. We had 450 people in a room, and I suppose I'm not really that entrepreneur. I'm not someone who runs a company of 450 people. I'm probably not the best at it. You need a different mindset to do that. Maybe you're less through the growth phase. You're more about consolidation. You're more about getting efficiencies and so on, and making sure that you deliver relentlessly. And that probably takes a different sort of leader. And I also wanted to do something else. I'd done that for more or less my 30s, and I wanted to position myself where I could do something else.
So since then you've done quite a lot, and you've invested and founded a number of projects like the renewable energy company Dawn Energy.
Also painful.
Why?
Because you get eggs thrown at you. If you go to Scotland and you try and ask people permission to build a wind farm, you get literally shouted at and eggs thrown at you. So that kind of thing is part of renewable energy in the UK anyway.
Okay. So, and you also founded the expense management service Expense Magic and the co-working space operator the Hive. Yeah. And the agri-tech startup Fly Farm and early-stage venture capital firm Honey Capital, and recently the not-for-profit environmental organization Earth.org. So these are quite a number of startups and organizations. I just want to know, do you think you will ever slow down?
I think I've always kind of admired people who, entrepreneurs who are able to do more than one thing. You need to have a great team. You have to be able to delegate, which I'm terrible at. And we're getting to that position now where we can do these multiple things. For Earth.org, we've got a brand new team. It's very young. We've got great people working there. It's in the same building, so I can give that contact point. Fly Farm's the same thing. It's in the floor below us in Kennedy Town. So they're a startup, which again, a very good CEO that's running that business. In terms of me slowing down, no, there's things that we need to do. There's challenges that I'd love to work on solving. Protein is obviously what Fly Farm is all about, and in the case of environmental news and data, that's what Earth.org is all about, and that's what I'd like to do more of as I go into my 50s.
Okay. And regarding the Hive, tell us what's the greatest challenge you have met here at the Hive?
Scaling. It's hard to scale. I wish sometimes that Hong Kong was a big country and not just a city-state, although arguably it does belong to China. But we meet operators in the US and they're just, chomping it out in the US, doing all of these cities, and it does seem a lot more straightforward. We're operating in 7 countries. That's quite painful. I think that pain that we've gone through is now paying off because we're diversified across the region. We can offer our clients a kind of a one-stop shop for their regional needs. All of these things benefit us. But operationally, day to day, it's quite painful. We have lots of different nationalities. We have different mentalities and skill sets in different countries that we have to solve in order to still deliver something consistently, and that's definitely quite challenging. And we, landlords are different, lease lengths are different, laws are different. There's a whole bunch of things which give us quite a lot of pain. So that's probably it as far as the Hive is concerned.
And does starting and operating a business get easier with time and experience?
Yes, I think it does, and I think we're beginning to see that quite a lot now. Actually in the Hive, quite a lot of my early experiences doing events and parties and even magazines is now being deployed in the Hive with Hive Life and with all our Hive events. With Earth.org, again, it's a magazine. We were able to utilize quite a lot of the stuff that we learned from Hive Life across on Earth.org. Clearly, like HR, management, all of these kind of instruments and internal processes, they can relate, transpose across from one business to another. So you begin to really see that. Even though we've done tech business, renewable energy business, now we're doing insect, which is basically an agri-tech business as well. There's commonalities between each of those organizations where you can take that and transpose that learning across into the new one.
And what's the hardest part about all of that? What's the hardest part of being an entrepreneur?
Well, apart from making money consistently, which is not that easy. And when you run your own company, you realize to make money, to grow the business, to be able to have enough capital. These are all challenges which are something which doesn't go away. I long for the days of software with Jagex, where it was, we were very lucky, we could scale. Your cost of scaling is nearly zero. Those are halcyon days basically in terms of a business. Anyone who runs a successful software business, that you get that benefit, and not many businesses are like that. So it's something which I think of every day. But different businesses have different challenges. They have different outcomes. They have different rewards.
Okay, thank you. I'm coming to the end, and just my last question would be, what's next for you? So what's next? What's the next step?
So our mission for the Hive is very clear. We want to be the strongest regional operator. We want to be a premium boutique operator, which is where we are. We want to grow further in all our key markets, Japan, Australia, also a little bit in Hong Kong, depending on what happens, Singapore. And we see lots of opportunity. We think co-working is here to stay. We think that there'll be consolidation. We think that some of the weaker players may not survive. We're already seeing that. We're benefiting from that. We're even benefiting from WeWork shrinking or reducing its capacity as well. So I think it's going to shake out a bit, but I do think that there's a very big long-term opportunity with flexible workspace and improved workplace environments like this. So that's really a core part of our mission. And then as an aside, yes, I'd like to see Flare Farm grow as a business. I'm not running it every day, but I'm founder investor. And then for Earth.org, that's a sort of private mission, which I hope that we can see through to really make impacts.
Thank you very much for sharing all of those.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All the experience. And now it's your turn. So you can write down, I think my colleagues, they passed you some question slips, so you can write down your questions here, pass it back to them, and then after the break, we'll take a 5 to 10 minute break now, then Hansen will answer your questions. Thank you. And you can grab a drink at the bar.
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
Thank you.